Imagine a single document, just a pamphlet really, dropped into this incredibly tense moment in history,
Uh-huh.
and it doesn't just contribute, it like completely changes the conversation.
Right, a lightning bolt.
Exactly. Thomas Paine's common sense. That's what we're unpacking today.
It really did shift the ground, you could argue.
So our mission here in this deep dive is to really pull this thing apart, understand the core arguments,
And the context. Why 1776? Why did it hit so hard then?
Yeah, and why did it resonate? We're using the text itself, the Project Gutenberg version, based on that original February 1776 edition, plus some later bits.
And it's so important to get that this wasn't just like an intellectual exercise for people reading it.
No way.
It was urgent, a direct response to the fighting that had already started. Paine was writing for everybody using plain language, not just the elites.
Totally. So try and put yourself back there. 1776 America,
Yeah.
taxes, soldiers, the real fear of all-out war. What do you do?
Is independence even possible? Is it right?
This deep dive, it's like a shortcut to the key ideas in this foundational text, as if you're reading it for the first time. Okay, let's get into it.
Let's do it.
So Paine kicks off right away with this really fundamental distinction. It kind of sets up everything else.
Society versus government.
Exactly. Society, he says, is good. It comes from our wants, brings people together, promotes happiness, a blessing.
But government, that's born from our wickedness, as he puts it.
Harsh.
It is. It's a necessary evil, even the best government. Its only job is security, basically reining in our vices.
He says if our conscience was enough, we wouldn't need government at all.
Right. Which is a pretty radical framing.
And the imagery. Government is like dress, a badge of lost innocence, palaces built on the ruins of the bowers of paradise. Wow.
Yeah, it's not some divinely ordained thing for Paine. It's a consequence of us messing up. A necessary fix, but still a fix for a problem.
Okay, so if it's a necessary evil, where does it come from? He paints this picture.
Of early settlers, right? A few people in the wilderness.
Yeah, initially they cooperate just to survive basic needs.
But then as they grow, things get more complicated.
Yeah.
That initial moral togetherness isn't enough anymore. Disagreements pop up.
So they need rules, regulations.
And his ideal early government. Super simple. They meet under a tree.
Yeah. Laws are just regulations. Public disapproval is the enforcement.
And key point, everybody has a seat. Direct participation.
But that can't last as it gets bigger.
Right. Impractical. So districts, representatives, but, and this is crucial for him, frequent elections. The reps have to go back and live among the people they represent. Keep those interests aligned. He says that's where the strength of government lies.
Not in some unmeaning name of king.
Exactly. That whole setup is his baseline, his ideal to contrast with what he's about to tear down.
Which brings us to the English Constitution. Now, lots of colonists actually respected the English system back then, right?
Oh, definitely. Saw it as a source of liberty compared to other places.
But Paine, he's like, okay, maybe it was noble for the dark and slavish times, a step up from pure tyranny.
But now it's imperfect, subject to convulsions, fundamentally flawed, can't deliver real freedom.
And here's where it gets really juicy. He doesn't see it as this balanced marvel. He sees it as a messy combination.
A real mix. He breaks it down into 3 parts, and he's not impressed.
What are they?
You've got the remains of monarchical tyranny, that's the king. Then the remains of aristocratical tyranny, the peers, House of Lords.
Okay.
And finally, the new Republican materials, the Commons, House of Commons.
And his big problem is with the first two.
Yes, because the king and the peers, they're hereditary.
Their power isn't from the people.
Exactly. They're independent of the people's will. So Paine argues, how can they possibly contribute to the freedom of the state? They're not accountable.
Okay, so much for hereditary power. What about the famous checks and balances? That's supposed to be the genius of it.
He thinks that's nonsense. Farcical, absurd.
Why absurd?
Because look at the logic. The Constitution assumes the king wants absolute power, right? So it gives the Commons power to check him, like controlling the money.
Makes sense so far.
But then it gives the king power to check the Commons by vetoing their bills. Paine's like, wait a minute. If we assume the Commons are wiser than the king, because they check him, why does the Constitution then assume the king is wiser than them? By letting him veto their decisions.
It's circular, a mere absurdity, as he says.
Exactly. It completely undermines the whole idea for him.
And he doesn't think the king actually does much useful anyway.
Pretty much. He argues being king isolates you from the real-world information you'd need to govern well.
So the role itself is absurd and useless.
Yeah, and the way the different parts fight each other just proves the whole system is broken.
But isn't the king supposed to be, like, kept in check?
Theoretically. But Paine says the crown is actually the overbearing part, not through force, but through, well, corruption.
How?
Places and pensions. The king controls appointments, patronage. That gives him the key to influence the commons, even though they've supposedly locked the door on absolute monarchy.
So the checks aren't real because the crown can just buy influence.
That's his argument. And he adds a really important point. If England has any freedom, it's not because the government is so great.
It's because of the people.
Yes, the constitution of the people, their spirit. That's what keeps it from being like, say, Turkey. Any fondness for the English system, he claims, is just national pride than reason.
Wow. Okay, so that critique naturally leads him into just a full-on assault on monarchy itself and hereditary succession.
Oh, yeah. He starts by saying the whole division of people into kings and subjects, there's no natural or religious reason for it.
Male and female are the distinctions of nature, good and bad, the distinctions of heaven. That's it.
That's it. Everything else is man-made and unjustified. Then he brings in history and the Bible.
Right. He claims the early days had no kings and thus no wars, which is debatable history, but serves his point.
Definitely serving his point. And Scripture, he argues the Almighty expressly disapproves of kings.
He uses Gideon, right, refusing to be king.
Yes, the Lord shall rule over you. A direct challenge.
And the big one is Samuel and the Israelites.
Oh, yeah. They demand a king like all other nations, and Samuel warns them what it'll cost.
Taking sons for the army, daughters as cooks.
Taking a tenth of everything, land, crops, servants. Paine uses this to show God wasn't happy about it, and then adds that little dig.
This manner of kings is still in fashion. Ouch.
He sees monarchy as basically one of the sins of the ancient Israelites.
Okay, so monarchy bad. What about passing the crown down, hereditary succession?
Even worse for Paine. It's a degradation and an insult on posterity.
Degradation how?
Because it implies some people are just born to rule over others, like property. And an insult because future generations don't get to choose. Their rulers are picked by accident of birth.
Makes sense. Why should someone rule just because their dad did?
Exactly. The original guy might have been worthy, maybe, but his kids, grandkids, they could be totally unworthy.
That's where the ass for a lion line comes in.
Yep. Nature makes a mockery of the whole idea by producing idiots in royal lines.
And he argues the first people who honored a leader couldn't possibly have the right to bind all future generations forever.
No way. How could they say, your children's children shall reign over ours? It's unjust to posterity. You might end up ruled by a rogue or a fool.
So how did hereditary rule even start, in his view?
He guesses it wasn't the plan originally. Maybe just casual or complimental honors at first. Then, after things got chaotic with early elections among leaders, he calls them ruffians, by the way.
Yeah.
Then myths and superstitious tales were used to cram hereditary right down people's throats.
And he points to William the Conqueror.
As a paltry, rascally original. Just a thug who took power by force, not by right.
So it's not just silly, it's actively bad. Evil, even.
Yes, the consequences. It opens a door to the foolish, the wicked, and the improper.
Yeah.
People born to reign get early poisoned by importance. They're ignorant of the world, unfit to rule.
And the practical problems, like when the king is a child.
Huge danger. Minor kings, sick kings. It leaves the country open to manipulation by regents, by schemers. The public suffers.
But what about the argument that, hereditary succession prevents civil war over who gets the crown?
Paine laughs that off. Bare-faced falsity, he calls it.
And he uses England's own history.
Right back at them. Since William the Conqueror. 30 kings and 2 minors, leading to 8 civil wars and 19 rebellions.
Oh.
He specifically mentions the Wars of the Roses, York versus Lancaster, nearly 70 years of brutal conflict because of hereditary claims.
So far from preventing war, it causes it.
His conclusion is damning. Monarchy and succession have laid the world in blood and ashes.
So what's the king's actual job, then, in a system like England's?
According to Paine, little more to do than to make war and give away places.
Which means?
To impoverish the nation and set it together by the ears. Basically, stir up trouble and hand out favors.
He finishes that section with that incredible line.
Yeah. Of more worth is one honest man to society and in the sight of God than all the crowned ruffians that ever lived. Just cuts right through it all.
Powerful stuff. Okay, so the old system is rotten. Monarchy is bad. Now what?
Now comes the pivot. Why America must break away And why now?
He says the talking is done. The period of debate is closed.
Arms.
Yeah.
Decide the contest. Reconciliation. Forget it. That's like using almanacs of the last year. It's irrelevant now.
And he lists the harms America suffers from being tied to Britain. What's the big one?
Getting dragged into Britain's European wars, wars that have nothing to do with America.
Right. He says America's enemies, like France and Spain, are only enemies because America is British.
Independence would let America steer clear of European contentions. Stay neutral.
What about the idea that Britain is the protective parent country? That was a common argument.
He shreds it, calls it fallacious. Britain protected America for its own interest, not attachment, for trade, for power.
He says Britain would defend Turkey for the same reasons if it suited them.
Exactly. And his counterimage is so strong. Europe, he says, is the real parent country, the asylum for the persecuted.
England is the monster that drove them out and is still chasing them.
Yeah. He argues even if everyone in America was purely English, Britain's actions as an open enemy have severed those ties completely.
And after the shooting starts, Lexington, conquered, reconciliation becomes impossible emotionally, right?
Totally. He asks you, the reader, point blank, can you love, honor, and faithfully serve the power that hath carried fire and sword into your land?
If your house is burned, family killed,
Okay.
can you shake hands with the murderers?
It's raw. He said reconciliation after that would be forced and unnatural. Doomed. He even quotes Milton.
Never can true reconcilement grow where wounds of deadly hate have pierced so deep.
Powerful. It taps right into the anger and grief people were feeling.
Beyond the emotion, there are practical problems with staying connected.
Huge ones. Just the distance. Trying to govern from 3,000 miles away is folly and childishness.
Sending a petition, waiting months for an answer, ridiculous.
And because America is just a secondary object for Britain, its own growth will always be stunted if it conflicts with British interests. Always second place.
Okay, but his argument that reconciliation now would be actively ruinous? That seems key. Why ruinous?
Because the king would still have veto power. And having shown himself an inveterate enemy to liberty.
He'd just block any laws America actually needed.
Exactly. Paine asks, is a power jealous of our prosperity, a proper power to govern us? He says no. America would be stuck, constantly quarreling or ridiculously petitioning.
Or just unable to function because needed laws couldn't get passed, enslaved by the want of laws.
Precisely. And it would be totally unstable politically, just a temporary expedient, a government by guardianship.
Nobody serious would invest or emigrate there, right?
Okay.
Too uncertain.
Right. And it risks internal conflict, maybe even civil wars, worse than anything Britain could do.
So independence isn't just an option, it's the only way to get peace and security.
That's his core message. Nothing but independence can keep the peace of the continent. It's the necessary step.
Okay, so America must separate, but can it? Can it actually succeed on its own against the British Empire? Paine seems pretty sure.
Oh, incredibly confident. He flat out says, our present numbers are sufficient to repel the force of all the world. Maybe a bit hyperbolic, but...
Sets the tone. And he focuses a lot on the Navy, right? Can America actually build one?
Yes. He makes a detailed case. He says, look, we have the raw materials right here. Tar, timber, iron, and cordage.
Unlike the Dutch, he points out.
Right. They have to import stuff. For America, building ships is a natural manufactory. It combines commerce and protection. It just makes sense.
What about sailors? Do they have enough experienced sailors?
He says you don't need everyone to be a veteran. A core of able and social sailors can train landmen.
And with the fisheries shut down and shipbuilders idle because of the conflict.
Now is the perfect time.
Yeah.
The manpower is available. He even mentions big ships being built in New England years before, proving it's possible.
Does he talk about cost? A navy sounds expensive.
He does. He uses some contemporary estimates about 3.5 million pounds sterling for a decent fleet.
Okay.
Then he compares that to Britain's national debt, 140 million pounds.
Whoa. Big difference.
His punchline is that America could have a really strong navy for just a fraction of 20th of what Britain already owes. Makes it seem totally achievable financially.
And strategically, how could an American Navy possibly stand up to the Royal Navy?
Home advantage. The British Navy is stretched thin all over the world. India, the Med, Africa.
Right.
An American Navy, even if it's only a 20th part of Britain's total size, can concentrate its force locally, achieve maybe a 2-to-1 advantage right there in the American coast, be an overmatch where it counts.
And they can threaten Britain's trade.
Especially the valuable West Indies trade. It's entirely at its mercy if America controls its own waters. That's real leverage.
Beyond the Navy, what about land warfare stuff?
He's confident there, too. Good small arms, ability to cast cannon, make their own saltpeter and gunpowder. The basic materials are there.
Plus that intangible.
Resolution is our inherent character, and courage hath never yet forsaken us. Got to have the fighting spirit.
And he really hammers home that now is the time. The timing is critical.
Absolutely critical. It's this unique window. America has enough people, the numbers, and it has the military ability for the recent French and Indian War.
That experience is key.
Yes. Wait 40 or 50 years, you'll have more people, sure, but that generation's practical military experience will be gone. This moment, with both numbers and experience, that's the proper point of time.
He also makes an economic point about now, doesn't he? Something unique to America.
The land. The vast unoccupied land out west. Sell it off, he says, and you can pay the entire war debt. And the quit rents, the small annual fees from that land, can fund the government going forward.
An advantage no nation under heaven hath. That's huge.
It really is. It makes the whole enterprise seem financially viable, almost easy.
So compared to trying to patch things up with Britain,
Independence is the easiest and most practicable plan. It's a single, simple line. Just decide. Reconciliation. That's perplexed and complicated dealing with a treacherous, capricious court. Hopeless.
And he warns about the current state of limbo, right? Being neither one thing nor the other.
Yes, it's dangerous. Without law, without government, just held together by courtesy. It's bizarre. Legislation without law, wisdom without a plan, constitution without a name.
Perfect independence contending for dependence.
Yeah.
That really captures the contradiction.
And property isn't secure. It invites trouble, makes America vulnerable.
What's the metaphor he uses? Something about a belt.
The continental belt is too loosely buckled. Time to tighten it up, make a decision before everything falls apart. Act now.
Okay, so independence it is. But what kind of government should replace the old one? Does he lay out a detailed blueprint?
Not exactly. He's careful to say he's offering hints, not plans. He knows this needs broader discussion.
But he gives some ideas, like starting with annual assemblies in each colony.
Yeah, with equal representation, handling local stuff, but all under a continental Congress.
And for that Congress, he has specifics.
He does. He suggests a good number of delegates, at least 30 per colony, maybe 390 total,
Yeah.
to ensure broad representation.
How would they pick a leader, a president?
By ballot, from delegates of one colony chosen by lot each time. And the colony rotates.
To prevent one region dominating.
Exactly. And for passing laws, he suggests needing a supermajority, 3/5 of the Congress, not just a simple 50% plus one.
What about the foundational rules, like the Constitution?
He proposes a special continental conference to frame a continental charter, like an American Magna Carta.
Who would be in that conference?
A mix. People from Congress, from the colonial assemblies, and crucially, representatives elected directly by the people just for this task, combining knowledge and power, as he says.
And what's the absolute core principle for this new government?
Simple but revolutionary. In America, the law is king.
Not the king is law.
The law is king. As in absolute governments, the king is law, so in free countries, the law ought to be king, and there ought to be no other. Authority rests in the law, chosen by the people, not in a person.
He even suggests smashing the crown symbolically.
Yeah, after the charter is proclaimed, making a clear statement.
What about religion? Does he want a state church or anything?
No, quite the opposite. Government's only job regarding religion is to protect all conscientious professors thereof. Full stop. Freedom of conscience.
He actually sees religious diversity as a good thing.
Yes, as the will of the Almighty. It creates a larger field for our Christian kindness. He compares denominations to children of the same family. Very tolerant view for the time.
Now, there's an appendix, too. He addresses the Quakers. What's that about?
Right, so some leading Quakers had put out a public statement basically condemning the move towards independence, arguing from pacifism.
And Paine responds.
Forcefully.
Yeah.
He argues they're overstepping, dabbling in matters of politics that aren't purely religious. He calls them inconsistent for not also condemning British violence.
He uses their own arguments against them.
Yeah, he points to a quote they use from Proverbs, suggesting the king's actions displease God, and says, "See, even you admit his rule is illegitimate." He basically argues their statement wasn't truly representative of all Quakers, but a political move by a faction, and it needed a public pushback because it was harming unity.
So wrapping up the main arguments, independence is necessary, practical.
And the only bond that can tie and keep us together. It's the foundation for unity.
It lets America act as a sovereign nation, American states, not just rebellious subjects.
Right. Allows them to make treaties, potentially even reconcile with Britain eventually as equals, holding out the hearty hand of friendship, and crucially, to unite internally, bury past disagreements.
And we know this pamphlet had a massive impact. What did people say right away?
Huge reactions all over the map.
Hmm.
Jefferson admired the writing, but loyalists like Nicholas Cresswell thought it was pure treason and lies.
Even supporters like John Adams were a bit nervous.
Yeah, Adams recognized its power, but worried it was too radical, especially the attacks on any kind of mixed government. But Benjamin Rush confirmed it just electrified the public almost overnight. It changed minds.
And Paine's own final image in the appendix. It's pretty grand.
It really is. Independence offers the chance to begin the world over again. A fresh start, like nothing since the days of Noah. He calls that opportunity awful, meaning awe-inspiring, profound.
So to recap our deep dive into common sense, we've seen Paine lay out the nature of government as he sees it, dismantle monarchy, detail why staying with Britain was harmful and impossible.
Argued strongly for America's ability to stand alone, and sketched out a vision for a new kind of government based on law, not kings.
It wasn't just abstract ideas. It was a practical, emotional, urgent argument aimed right at the people of 1776.
A masterclass in persuasion, really. Using history, scripture, logic, emotion, everything he could to push for that break.
Understanding this document, you really get a feel for that pivotal moment, the ideas that drove the revolution. It aimed to give people the power of knowledge to make a huge choice.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us on this exploration of the source material.
And maybe one final thought to leave you with. Paine wrote right at the beginning that the American cause was bigger than just America. It was, in a great measure, the cause of all mankind. He envisioned America as an asylum for mankind. So thinking about that today, what does that idea mean now? A nation founded, at least in part, on this principle of being an asylum, based on the radical ideas and common sense. How does that resonate or maybe challenge how we think about nations and responsibility today? What stands out to you?